All right, well, welcome everybody back to our series on being an effective leader. And the being is really important. It's being aware of the affect that you have on people and that leadership is influence. And of course, there's always tips and tricks about leadership, but it really just comes back to just slowing down and being conscious about the effect that you're having. Who are you being, and how is that affecting the environment, the people, the conversation, wherever you are? And today, we want to talk about one that is right at the heart of that around communication, probably the most referenced issue in organizations. Comes up on every survey we do. We hear it all the time that there's communication problems, but it almost can be meaningless. And so let's talk a little bit about that. Brad, why is this such a struggle, you think, that communication comes up so often for leaders and organizations?
Well, you know, people obviously need to know what's going on. They need information, but it's first of all, it's hard to discern what's meant by communication. Sometimes communication means we don't get enough information, but usually at least we find that it's more of a code word for relationships. We don't have the strong relationships that we really need to have.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, many times when it comes up, the solution is, well, we need to have more meetings, or we need a newsletter. Let's get a newsletter out, or we need to send out more emails. But I just want you to stop and think for a minute. Is the communication issue because there aren't enough people talking? Is it because you don't get enough emails? Gosh, I wish I got more emails. 100 a day isn't nearly enough, and that's nothing compared to what some of you guys get.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it something else?
Yeah.
Tom, if it's not one of those things, what's another candidate?
Yeah, it's this is one of those that's very layered and very specific to every organization, but I think you put your finger on it, Brad, that most often it's sort of code word for relationships. If you look at the origin, the etymology of communication, it comes from a Latin word communicare, which means to share. And if you think about that, one of the things that's mostly missing, mostly frustrating, is that we don't feel like anyone's listening to us. We don't feel like our colleagues are truly understanding us. They're not sharing in our understanding of what we're trying to communicate. And so we're kind of talking past each other, around each other.
Or we interrupt each other.
Yeah, we interrupt each other. And really it boils down to, we've got a relational problem, but we don't want to say that. So we say we've got a communication problem. So it takes some time to really think about in your organization what's going on, to slow down before you start putting out solutions and more newsletters and more emails and more videos. Just slow down and really think about what's going on here. And we've got a few specific ideas on how you can do that.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about that is maybe the most obvious possible solution, and it might seem so obvious that it doesn't get considered, or maybe we don't put enough intention behind it, is just learning to share your attention. That communication is both ways, and so we just suck at communicating. We don't actually listen to other people. We're listening to that voice in our head about what we think about what they're saying, or what we're thinking about something different, because we're not mentally totally present. So what is the Brad, when we're working with organizations and we set up kind of ground rules and ways to encourage everyone to be present, talk about what are some of the ways we try to help people try this on, to really listen?
Well, kind of the overarching thing is, when listening, notice that you have an opinion. It sounds like such a simple statement, but how do you notice when you have an opinion? What do you mean notice when you have an opinion? We are opinion machines. When we hear somebody talk, usually they'll get a sentence out, maybe only a half a sentence, and right away we start thinking about what they're saying. And we conclude that we know what they're saying, or we agree with what they're saying, or we don't agree with what they're saying. We think they're full of it, or we think they're great. We start listening to our opinion, that little voice in our head, instead of listening to them. And then we lose most of what they say. It's just it's the mechanism. Our brains are this great gift. We're able to conceptualize. The problem is that we're like a conceptualization machine. It just goes by itself. And it makes it really difficult for us to just receive what other people are saying. Instead of just receiving, we want to judge, are they right? Are they wrong? Do we agree? Do we disagree? Are they credible? Are they not? That voice is going crazy, and we completely lose what they have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And this has pretty significant implications for relationships.
If you're looking for a sort of pragmatic way to get better at this, just start keeping note, pull out a notepad, just start making journal entries, if you will, of when you notice that you're starting to listen to your own voice in your head and you stop listening to them. In fact, one of the things that we do in our coaching calls with clients, or even when we're engaged in workshops and whatnot, is we'll actually have the notepad right next to us, and we'll write down something that they said, and that allows us to then go back to listening to what are they going to say next, and what are they going to say next. And it's just a word or two. You can also start keeping track of your own thoughts, like what you want to say once they're done talking, for instance, is a great thing to write down, because as soon as you write it down, then your brain can go back to listening to what the other person is saying. And oftentimes 3, 4, 5 sentences later, what you wrote down is really no longer relevant because they explained themselves, or because they said something different than what you thought they were going to say. And so really easy tool to try for a couple of weeks, and you'll be fascinated by how often that voice in your head really is taking you off course and taking you away from the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just keeping you from being able to be open to what they're saying before you jump to those thoughts or conclusions or add-ons. So yeah, you can write down some notes. Brad, I think you said just notice it. What do you do with it once you notice it?
Well, when I notice that I'm thinking about what they said, that voice in my head is like off on an opinion, I'll stop and repeat the words that they're saying in my head. So that it forces me to occupy that voice, to occupy my thoughts with their thoughts, rather than with my thoughts about their thoughts.
Yeah. And in that case, one of the follow-up things we suggest is, you don't need to change your opinion, by the way. We all do it. This is very human nature. This does not make any one of us particularly abnormal. This is just what our brains do. We're constantly generating thoughts and ideas and these opinions. So we're not even suggesting that you change it, but just get good at noticing it, and just let it be. You don't need to convince yourself. You don't need to convince other people that you're right. Again, just start noticing it, and you'll be fascinated by how often it comes up. We also say, set it aside. And this is probably the hardest part, and try on what is being said. What do we mean by that, Kevin?
Just hearing that is their perspective. And then you can decide from there how to listen to coaching from it, or how to respond, or reflective listening, as you were saying, Brad, is such a helpful tool I've learned. I assume I know where people are going a lot in conversations and words, and until I make sure I've got a real grasp of what the issue is or the problem, I'm going to waste our time. I'm giving them my attention, but I'm trying to jump, like fast forward the conversation. And maybe that's part of what trying it on is about, slowing down and just, it's almost like practicing radical acceptance in the middle of a conversation. It's just, oh, that's interesting. That is how you see that. Okay. I can understand that, or I can't. And lots of questions come from that if you're curious, which is, we talked about curiosity. Maybe that's an interesting question, Brad, is what's the difference between being curious as a leader and being open?
That is an interesting question. I've never really given that much thought. To me, they're related. They might even be the same thing. I don't know. I think maybe being open is more passive. It's like I'm willing to listen, as opposed to being curious is actively bringing my sense of inquiry my interest. Like, I'm not just passively, okay, I'm willing to accept what you have to say and consider it. It's more, I'm really interested in what you have to say. I'm gonna like sit on the edge of my chair and really bring my attention to it and really think about each word, the words that you're using, and then wonder what you meant by that. So many times people use terminology. They'll say, I when you do this, I don't feel respected. Well, I have a perception of what respected means, but I don't really know what they mean by it. So if I'm being curious, if I'm being open, I'm, okay, he doesn't feel respected. But if I'm being curious about it, I'm going to dig in and say that, well, it's interesting. What do you mean by respected? What is it that I'm doing that leads you to believe that I do or don't respect you? And then listen and keep digging, that curiosity. And that really builds relationships because it fosters understanding. It sends people the message that I'm really interested in you. I really care about what you think.
Mm.
That was a good question.
Mm.
You must have been curious about that.
It just dawned on me. I'm like, because my curiosity can keep me from being open because I'm so curious about how does that work and how does that affect, like, which starts becoming about my own curiosity as opposed to curiosity for the sake of the person I'm listening to understand.
Mm.
And perhaps that openness is in part, it's really just seeking to understand their perspective. And yeah, that if a leader wants better communication or wants their people to be better listeners, that they can start with just themselves becoming a better listener. Just practice listening. Listen more. Or ask.
Yeah, listen. Get really good at slowing down and listening to your people, and you'll be amazed at how quickly some of those communication problems may go away because they actually feel like they're being heard by their boss in particular, which is very, very powerful. It's one of the most powerful tools we have in our leadership toolkit, but we all think we're too busy to do it. But if you want to be effective at leading, you've got to slow down. You got to listen to your folks because your job is to help them grow, help them produce results. And if you just go, and you're not slowing down to listen to them, you're not going to get the results you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of this that we think is really valuable when you think about being open. So the first one is, notice you have an opinion, start getting better at noticing it, set it aside and try on what the person's saying. So that's the first one is sort of becoming much more self-aware. The second is we say, listen for coaching. So listen for coaching. What does that mean, Brad?
Well, when we think about coaching, we think about, well, a coach goes to get trained in how to be a good coach. We think of coaching as being the ability to speak in a way or relate to someone in a way that allows you to convey advice, or capabilities. But really, one of the things that we say to clients is coaching is only coaching if it's asked for. That doesn't mean it literally needs to be asked for, but what we're saying is only when people are receptive to hearing what you have to say is what you have to say of any value. Let me say that again. Only when people are receptive to hearing what you say does what you have to say have any value. If they're not receptive, I don't care how brilliant you are, it ain't going to have any value. Mm-hmm. So coaching really exists not in the way we speak. Coaching exists in the way people listen. And if you get good at listening for coaching, which is a different way of saying listening to opinions that disagree with your own. Get good at embracing. Now, I'm not saying agree with, but get good at understanding and embracing opinions that you think are ridiculous, that you think are not warranted, allowing differing versions of reality to coexist in your mind is a skill that not very many of us are good at. We want to argue with and explain to you why you're wrong about, this opinion. But you may have noticed yourself while you're listening to us today that there are times when you go, oh, that's ridiculous. Of course I'm open. And what does he mean, the difference between curiosity and openness? They're the same, it's what we do.
Just a couple weeks ago, I was talking to one of our CEOs, and we were just catching up and how are things going, and what do we need to accomplish next time we get together, and how did it go last time? And pretty quickly he said, well, Tom, I'm not sure how to say this, but the team thought you were pretty grumpy last time we met. And in my head, I pretty quickly went through, I don't know what you're talking about. No, I wasn't. You're crazy. I don't get grumpy. But luckily I said none of that. I said, oh, that's interesting. And it was hard to do because I wanted to defend myself, but I knew that I had to demonstrate, I had to model the work. And so within like 2 or 3 seconds, I immediately shifted into, okay, there's some coaching here for me. I don't know what it is. Frankly, I don't remember it because it was like a month ago. So let me get curious and see what's going on. Let me learn what was I doing, so that I can take responsibility for that. And it ended up being a great conversation. And then we ended up using it with the team a few days later, to demonstrate that, we're all human. We all slip into behaviors that we don't even realize that we're unconscious to. Clearly, I was grumpy last time with you guys, and all I can do now is apologize and talk about how, as a team, that it's great you gave me the feedback, but it was a month late. The really, really good teams get good at noticing things in the moment. If somebody had said to me during that time, hey, Tom, maybe on a break, you all right? Everything okay? You seem a little off. That could have woken me up in the moment, and I would have been much more productive over the next several hours or the next day that we were together. So there is also an element of timeliness here, that if we're trying to help each other, that we want to be able to sort of handle these things in the moment, as close to the moment as possible.
Yeah. It's just a good, healthy reminder to, like, we tend to want, especially if that moment is in a group setting, not to, like, we don't want to call you out, or we don't want you to be awkward, so we'll deal with it later, which just kind of leaves that residue there, and often later doesn't happen, or doesn't happen timely, to your point. Something that could have been addressed in the moment, or thought through, or processed. And sometimes that's the best thing, is just that open moment of vulnerability, like, oh, I didn't know I was coming across grumpy, or I am in fact grumpy, or whatever other effect we're having. Okay.
One of the things that sometimes gets in the way of people being able to listen too is when people go on too long. And I wonder if this video is getting too long.
Not possible.
Their openness has ended.
We're only halfway through. I'll just close with a quick thought, which is, a lot of stuff it seems pretty elementary probably to many of you, and most of it is, frankly. We learned a lot of this stuff in kindergarten or first grade. But I remember having an awesome teacher in middle school, and he said, communication is what's heard, Tom, not what's said. And as leaders, that's really the fundamental point here, is that we've got to become much more self-aware. We've got to notice our own opinions, and we've got to listen for coaching. We've got to be willing to listen and get curious and ask questions and learn as much as we can. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if we're right, it matters if we're effective. And if you want to be effective, then work on making sure that your message, your communication is being heard in the way you want it heard, not that you're necessarily saying it in the way that you want to say it.
And the best way to do that is by listening yourself. Yeah.
Being open and worthy of practicing constantly, every day, every meeting. Find some habit that has you slow down and get conscious of, what effect do I need to have? How do I need to be open? Or maybe circle back to some of the conversations you weren't so open with in the moment. But with that, we'll sign off, to Brad's point. In case you're still listening, thanks. And hope you continue to just constantly wrestle with these concepts. Obviously, they'll make you a better leader. They'll make you a better human. And we'll see you next time.